it's you got to be aware of your surroundings. But overall, I feel safe. But they always have to be aware.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is just another opinion from a New Yorker. We sent our cameras down, our Newsmax cameras down, to gain the pulse of the city, if you will. And most people, although they're concerned, are unafraid, at least outwardly, when they address the camera. Before we get to our guest, Jim Hoft, I just want us to watch this video, then we'll comment on it. Take a look.
I think we have to be just as worried about the reaction to the attack from nationalists, from right-wingers, from people who have sought to drive this wedge, as it was described earlier, between the Islamic communities and the mainstream communities in Europe. They're conducted by people who are radicalized by overreaction. You know, one of the reports has it that one of these guys who led this attack was radicalized by reading about Abu Ghraib, that prior to that he was not an extremist, and after that he moved into this vein of thought.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining us now is Jim Hoft, founder and chief blogger at the Gateway Pundit. And Jim, always great to talk to you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Steve.
Well, I mean, here we are. You know, you and I have talked so much about what's going on in this country with the police and the the protests against the police, and now we I guess pivot over to what took place in France, and you know it's just so frightening and so upsetting. And you look at what happened today. You know, 4 more dead civilians who did nothing more than go to a bakery.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, Steve. The one thing, as you know, I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and it certainly took the news away from this city for a while. But it also sucked the energy out of that Ferguson movement that was, getting so much attention in the past few months. I am glad you played that clip of that MSNBC clip. I assumed that was. There was
yeah,
also,
it was. Yep.
Yeah, several other commenters this week. Sally Cohn from CNN contributor comparing the jihadists to conservatives. So, it's just amazing still that there's that denial on the left with the reality and the situation that's going on in the world.
Yeah, and somebody, I forget who it was, also compared, I forget who it was, a Christian group, it's a very prominent person and group, suing Larry Flint at Hustler, compared that to what the animals did at the offices of the magazine in France.
Yeah, it's just crazy, isn't it? And even today, as the one terrorist, the woman is out on the loose, they're putting up reports that she was radicalized because she read about, as you said, Abu Ghraib and American actions in Iraq and Chechnya. Well, we're not even in Chechnya. It's just it's unbelievable, and yet these atrocities they commit. Compare that to naked pyramid at Abu Ghraib. It's just there's no comparison with what they did.
Oh, not at all. And Greg tells me it's Jerry Falwell. Thank you, Greg. And by the way, absolutely no comparison. And what was the incitement? What did they see in the media? What did America do we weren't in Iraq, we weren't in Afghanistan, there was no Abu Ghraib, there was nothing for the first World Trade Center bombing, for the bombing of our embassies in Africa, for the second World Trade Center attacks. What was the motivation? How did we instigate that?
Right. Well, I think we're starting to see more and more of us in the Western society are really starting to see what we're up against. I think this was truly a blow to the left this week, to their narrative, and to Barack Obama. He sounds, more out of touch by the day with his reaction to this. But I think more and more people in Paris, in France, in Western Europe, and in America are really starting to see the threat that we're under from these jihadists.
You at the Gateway Pundit had a real eye-opening story, which just reinforces what many of us have already known to some extent, and that is some of the protesters from Ferguson, quote unquote. I mean, who the heck knows where they're from? You probably could tell me exactly. Went to visit Palestinians in the West Bank and showed solidarity with them. compared, blacks in America to the Palestinians, and came up even with a poster where it's kind of half of an African American in the U.S. and half of a Palestinian. I mean, this is what we know, that a lot of these so-called protesters have ulterior motives.
Right. And the interesting thing about that story, Steve, is the fact that how are these unemployed protesters from Ferguson, and there's been about a half dozen of them, they've been flown to New York for the protests there in your city. They've been flown now to the West Bank and to Israel so that they can learn about the jihad over in the West Bank and what their struggle against Israel. So, who's paying for all this? It's just, it's very, it makes you wonder, obviously there's larger groups behind these movements that we're seeing. We also saw this week that some of these groups, they've combined now the $15 per hour minimum wage, the Palestinian cause, and the hands up, don't shoot calls are all now marching together in different protests.
Yep, and you could see the signs up and have even, it's been that way for a long time. Let me ask you, you brought up the president and what he said today, and I don't know if you sound like you might have heard me at the beginning of the show. This man showed no emotion. This man, do you remember when Fort Hood happened? Fort Hood, right, in his own country, and he took 2.5 minutes doing shout-outs to the crowd he was in front of, yucking it up, and then he told us 13 people were dead at Fort Hood. Today it was about 2 minutes before he got around to this as well about what happened today. But, what is it about dead Christians, victims of terror, and dead Jews, victims of terror, that this man doesn't get moved by it?
Well, Steve, I don't know if you noticed this too, but he was reading that off of his teleprompter today. That wasn't even off the cuff. That wasn't even something from his heart that he was talking about. He was switching his head back and forth, reading from the teleprompter as he talked about the brutal, hostage taking and murders today. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. But that, Jim, as you know, that's who he is. Hey, have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. We'll speak to you soon. Everybody check out thegatewaypundit.com. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, and we'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, with former Navy SEAL Carl Higbie. He will be here to talk about how to keep us safe here. Don't go away.